Sometimes these are printed, sometimes they're just intuited into improvised music. The symbol for a turn looks kind of like a sideways S, and the inverted turn is just an inversion of that, upside down. Again, the symbol is an exact graphic representation of the sound. To perform the turn, start on the printed note, let's say it's G. Go up, usually a step, maybe to A, go back to the printed note, to G, then go down under it to F or to F sharp, and then end the figure back on the printed note, which is G. The inverted turn then would be performed going down first and then up, since it's going to be the exact opposite of what we've done before. Take a look at my hands and I'll demonstrate a turn on G. I'll play G first, go up to A, back to G, down to F sharp, and end on G. And pay attention to the rhythm that I use when I play the turn, because this is the rhythm that's most commonly heard on a turn. Here we go. Now listen to that if I chose, for example, F natural instead of F sharp. And a turn doesn't just have to be whole steps and half steps. I'll play a turn using the pitches G, B, and E. Now listen to an inverted turn. I'll play G, F sharp, G, A, and back to G. Practice turns from every note, not just these, because you never know when you'll run into them in your music. And practice with different variations of whole steps and half steps. Just on those notes, you could have 4 different turns and 4 different inverted turns. We could go whole steps only, G, A, G, F, G. Half steps only, G, A flat, G, F sharp, G. Or mix them up, whole step then half step. Or then half step and whole step. And so you can get some different sounds that way. Practice turns from every pitch, and again, in the extreme registers, not only will you run into maybe sound difficulties, but fingering problems. So work on those. Okay, the next technique that we'll take a look at is subtoning, and subtoning is something that's a lot of fun to do, but it's a fairly difficult sound to produce. If you really want to master subtoning, you should get your hands on some recordings of Lester Young of the Count Basie Orchestra. The guy was an absolute master at the subtone. So let's take a look at the side shot and I'll show you how this effect is produced. First of all, we're going to practice subtoning without the saxophone. So place your embouchure, or your teeth and lips as it were, in the shape of a letter V, just as if you were going to say letter V, like this. And then blow air and kind of buzz through that. And it seems kind of silly to practice that, but that's really a lot like the subtone feels on the saxophone. Now, when you get to the saxophone, this sound is achieved by forming your usual embouchure, but then relax your lower jaw a whole lot, almost pulling your jaw back, and then push out with real fast air. Listen to it. And that's what the subtone sounds like. You'll find that with this looser grip of your jaw and your lip, that the reed is going to be slower to respond. So you're definitely going to have to use a lot more air than you're used to using. And you may find as you begin to practice this that you get a little lightheaded at first until you get used to doing it. Also, you may find that you'll have to tongue a little harder because, again, the reed is going to be slower to respond. But the subtone is something that's a lot of fun to do. I think you're going to have a lot of fun with it when you get it going. Work on that. We'll be back with something else. All right, the next thing that we'll talk about is ghosting. And ghosting is something that you may have already run across if you're in a school jazz band. If you've seen notes printed in your music that are in parentheses, that means that those notes are to be ghosted. And what ghosting a note means is simply to let the horn resonate from the previous note. You go ahead and finger the note that's in parentheses, but you don't actually blow through it. Let me demonstrate what I'm talking about. I'll be using the pitches B and G. I'm blowing through the B and slurring into the G, fingering it, but I'm not actually blowing through the G. Here's what it would sound like if I were. With full air through the G. Listen to it again, the G is ghosted. And to ghost a note, it's almost like you say the letter N inside your mouth. You blow, and then you back away, close your mouth into a letter N. You don't really move your embouchure, just close up the inside of your mouth and go ahead and finger the note. Because of the nature of ghosted notes, you always have to slur into them, and they're more often than not going to be in a descending pattern, meaning an upper note to a lower note that's ghosted. Let me play a couple of more of these for you. And you can hear the second note sounding much softer than the first one each time. A good way to practice ghosting is to do your scales in thirds, kind of like what I was just doing. So work on that one. We'll be back with something else. Okay, the next thing we'll talk about will be the various articulations that you run into in jazz playing. And just like the bends and the turns and so on, some of these are printed. Sometimes you've just got to intuitively know what to do, so that's what I'm going to be helping you with on this. First of all, you've probably heard your band director talk about articulations in terms of syllables, like dit and dot and do, and so on. Let's take a look at the graphic, and we'll look at 4 of these articulations that you may have seen before. In the upper left-hand corner, that articulation, as you probably know, is called a staccato dot. And to play notes staccato means to separate them. And in jazz, if you use a dit articulation, a short separated note on your horn, you'll be playing correct staccato style. The length of the note, or the amount of short that you make it, depends on the tempo of the piece. Let's say we've got a medium to fast piece. This is what staccato would sound like. Now look right under that. Compare that sound to the housetop accent. This is also a short note, and you may have heard your band director call this one dot. What the dot or the housetop accent is, not to be confused with the staccato, which looks like a dot, is a short note but one that's accented. Listen to the difference. Here's plain staccato. Here's a housetop accent. Certainly a difference in volume and energy on that. Okay, upper right-hand corner, we have what we call a tenuto line or tenuto marking. This is a do articulation, very smooth, very connected. Listen to this. And right underneath that, contrast that with the horizontal accent, which is also a long note, but one that's got some energy on the front of it. So you've got your 4 different articulations that you see printed sometimes. The staccato, a short note, no accent. Tenuto, a long note, no accent. Housetop accent, a short note, accented, and horizontal accent, a long note, accented. Okay, now here's another kind of articulation. You've probably heard this one before or seen your music marked swing. Saxophone players have a certain articulation that they use for swing. And sometimes this is printed, sometimes it's not. Sometimes your music won't have any slurs at all written. Sometimes your music will have a couple of measures, eighth notes slurred together. What swing articulation is tonguing every other note, and that way you get the triplet feel that's part of the swing style. Let me play a major scale. This will be concert F, using a swing articulation. Listen to it. I'm tonguing every other note and slurring into the next one. And more quickly. And that's the correct way to produce swing style on saxophone. A lot of players have the misconception that you should really alter the rhythm a lot. If you do that, it's going to come out sounding kind of hokey. And that's really not swing style. Swing style should be smooth and connected. I think you can hear the difference there. So anytime you see swing written on the top of some of your music, or you listen to swing music, or you try to play swing music, try to work that articulation into it. And you may find that you'll have to write this in every once in a while until you get the hang of it. So what you'll be doing will be tonguing the upbeats, slurring into the next downbeats. And one more thing that we'll look at in terms of articulation, and that's what to do with syncopated patterns. As a general rule, if you're playing something that's syncopated, play shorter notes. Listen to something. As opposed to, even without a rhythm section or a drum machine or anything going on, the first way I played it had a lot more stylistic character, a lot more feel. So play your syncopated notes shorter. Listen again. Okay, keep those concepts in mind, work on them, and we'll be back with one more technique. Okay, alternate fingerings can be used for a variety of reasons, the most obvious of which is to allow the player greater speed in getting from one note to the next. It's a good idea to use alternate fingerings whenever they seem appropriate, rather than just getting into the habit of using one fingering only for a particular note. If you do that, sometimes you'll need to use an alternate fingering, you'll be in trouble, you'll be in a really fast passage, and you won't know it. So make them part of your everyday practice. Another reason to use alternate fingering is intonation. Sometimes one fingering tunes better than another one on a particular note. And a third reason for using alternate fingerings is going to be in your soloing. You could stay on one note, use 3 or 4 different fingerings for it, and add some variety to your solo that way. So let's look at some different notes. First of all, first one we're going to look at is called long C sharp. C sharp is usually played open, all keys up. And if you've got a pattern like a trill between C sharp and D, that's a pretty difficult thing to do. Let me demonstrate that for you. You'll see both hands closing to play D, both hands opening for C sharp. And you also get some key noise in there. It's rather awkward. The long C sharp fingering is going to help fix that. Finger a D with the octave key. Lift up on your left hand the first and second finger. That fingering gives you C sharp. Has a slightly different pitch and tone quality than the one you just heard, but it is a C sharp. Now let me go back and forth between D and this C sharp fingering. You'll hear the difference. In a rapid passage like a trill, that fingering works real well. As opposed to, which is just a little more difficult to do. Long C sharp is fingered with the thumb on the octave key, your ring finger on the G key, and 1 and 2 of the left hand up. And then in the right hand, you could have a D, an E flat, an E, an F sharp, or a G fingered with no fingers down in your right hand. All of these will produce the same pitch C sharp, just each will have a slightly different intonation. Listen to it. Here's C sharp, first with a D fingering, then I'll go up chromatically. So the point is, using long C sharp, you can play all over your horn real quick. Say you have an E to C sharp, 16th notes, or some difficult passage like that. So that fingering will come in real handy for you. Okay, now let's look at a couple of fingerings for B flat. Many of you probably know side B flat, which is like an A, and then with the bottom side key pressed. There are a couple of other fingerings that you should be familiar with. Most important probably is going to be the bis fingering for B flat. The bis key is this little small key right under the B note, and you may have always wondered what that was there for. To play bis B flat, finger a B and then slide down so that your forefinger covers both keys at once. And you'll hear that that has the same sound as side B flat. Here's side B flat first. Now with my forefinger, I'll play both those keys, and this is bis B flat. Where that fingering comes in handy is from intervals farther away than a step. Let's say you have a fast passage B flat to G. If you use bis B flat, you just have to move 2 fingers. That's a lot handier than this contrary motion that you have going if you're using side B flat. Again, you can hear the key noise. Listen to bis B flat played rapidly with G. So that's a good one to know about. Let's say you've got B flat and F in a pattern. You can play B flat using one of your left hand and one of your right hand. And if you look in the circle, you're going to see that when I press the key with my right hand, that the bis key is moving up and down. That key is connected to all of these keys down here in this part of the horn. So you can play a B flat using 1 and 1. If you have a B flat to F pattern, you can play your F, raise up these 2 fingers, holding this right hand finger down, and that'll give you the pattern you need. Same thing works, middle finger, F sharp to B flat, or you could say F sharp to A sharp, which is a pattern that you run into sometimes. Again, just move these 2 fingers. It's a lot easier than going F sharp this way to side B flat. That's a very, very awkward motion. So use those alternate fingerings for B flat. They come in real handy. Another thing that's important to know about is called articulated G sharp. And we've already used the term articulation, meaning what you do when you tongue notes. Actually, the term articulation comes from a word that you might think it has absolutely nothing to do with. It means connected. And so the articulated G sharp is connected the same way the bis B flat key is to this part of the horn. You can play anything with your right hand and hold the G sharp key open, and the right hand note will close the actual hole in here that's opening. When you leave the key open though, and you let up with your right hand, you've still got a G sharp. So if you've got a pattern, let's say E to G sharp, and you've got to do that over and over again. And it's difficult to move your little finger that fast. Well, you don't have to move your little finger at all. Just hold it down. And again, you can play anything in the right hand. When you come away from it, if you've got this key pressed, you're going to get a G sharp. And so on. Same thing works with the low C sharp key, because again, that opens this hole right in here. And one more thing that we'll look at is a couple of trill keys. You may know this fingering called side C. If you've got a trill from B to C, it's difficult to flip like that.